Good evening, kids. I'm Ollie Fug, and this is the story of Mary the Fairy. It's a little more unconventional than fairy tales you're used to hearing, so sit back and enjoy tonight's read. Once upon a time, there was a stunning magical fairy named Mary. But Mary wasn't just any fairy. Mary was a vagina fairy. Her one job was the protection of very special vaginas, the young vaginas of royalty to be exact. In order to keep these precious wombs free and clear from stray penises in an ever more becoming environment of liberal sexual exploits and lessened self-standards, extreme measures had to be put in place by the powers that be. And that was the introduction of Vag Gnomes. Vag Gnomes were savage warriors, brought back to life by pixie dust in the forgotten bodies of miscarried fetuses. Their only reason for being was to protect that vagina at all costs from stray cocks, thus maintaining family dignity, embarrassment, and strong bloodlines. So, when Mary the Fairy got the call that a young royal was coming of age and the evidence of dry humping had been found dried to the crotch of her dress, she without hesitance jumped into gear. There was just one problem. Mary the Fairy was the South. She had been drinking heavily for several days at a nudist fairy party, and needless to say, she wasn't flying a very straight line. She eagerly pulled her tight white body stocking up over her vivacious curves and streaked into action. But the heavy cloud of intoxication was too much for poor little Mary the Fairy to endure. Her delicate little wings had led her astray, and Mary the Fairy flew directly into a high voltage wire. Snap! An hour later, Mary the Fairy groggily awoke in a foggy stupor of inebriation, accompanied by 10,000 volts of electricity. Stunned and confused, a vision of a mission began to manifest itself into Mary's head. A girl in need of protection. The summoning of a Vag Gnome. Mary the Fairy stood up and dusted herself off. She was all covered in magic pixie dust. As the dust scattered all around her, she began to become aware of her surroundings. By complete fluke, the mighty jolt had shot her right through the window and into the crotch of a young woman who had just so happened to have an unknown miscarriage of her own. There was just one problem. This was no daughter of a queen. This was an apartment in Queens. Mary the Fairy eagerly tried to sweep up and collect the magic pixie dust and undo what she had just done, but it was for naught. The damage was clearly there to stay, and the embodiment of an old veteran gnome named Dick Dribble had taken his place inside the vagina of a young, promiscuous woman living in the slums. And if that wasn't enough trouble for poor little Mary the Fairy, some of that magic pixie dust had even given birth to a huge Klingon, which clung to an ass hair in the unkept woman's crack, creating the first known ass gnome named Mucky Shets. As a heavy wave of shame and guilt washed over Mary the Fairy and the colossal mistake she had just made, so too did another feeling: sobriety. The powers that be never had to know about this little blunder, she thought. All she had to do was check in on them once in a while and never let her secret out. So back to her party she flew, to the sweet liquidity of mind-numbing cocktails, good times, and lack of responsibility. There's a message there, kids, and good on you for keeping perfect posture. The end.